This is Animation for Adults. My name is Yvonne Grinkovich. I had an opportunity to sit down with Kelly Barahona to chat about the Animation First Festival, 6th edition, held at the French Institute Alliance Française in New York City. Please enjoy. Sounds good. You go first.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly. I am a Animation Nice New York volunteer. I do grants and I do research and writing occasionally. And I recently got to attend the Animation First Festival with my good colleague and good friend, Yvonne. Hi, Yvonne. How you doing?
Doing well. Hello. This is Yvonne Grinkovich. I'm the founder of Animation Nights New York, and we are here to chat about the FIAF Animation First 2023 edition.
What does FIAF stand for, Yvonne?
The French Institute Alliance Française. They have been around. I've been a friend of the festival since the beginning. It just gets better and better every single year, and it's always a highlight for me. They really take time and care of and curation, this was another really good year, and it's still going on.
Yeah, so I understand this is the 6th year of this festival, and this is the first year since 2020, I believe, that this is in person. I believe in 21 and 22 it was a hybrid or virtual festival, so it's great to be back in New York fully and back for like a full immersive in-person experience. We were invited to the opening night, so we were seeing the opening feature film Little Nicholas, As Happy as Can Be, which I think it's supposed to be a biography about the two cartoonists who designed the actual comic, isn't it, Yvonne? It was like a bit of a true to life biography story about these two men who were best friends, and they kind of inspired each other to kind of make this comic come to life. Essentially, it's their son of sorts, or their artistic creative vision coming to life for many years. And this is just like a monologue is not the right word, but I guess little snippets of their life and how their life inspired the stories and vice versa, kind of like a tit for tat. It was really like a nice, wholesome, inspirational story about, for me anyway, this idea of mutual inspiration, like how two people can inspire each other, but also how creatives can be inspired by the work they make, and the work that we make can be inspired by our real lives. It's kind of like always like a circle that goes round and round. It doesn't really have an end necessarily. Even if one's life ends, for better or for worse, it's always going to be something that is everlasting, the creative endeavors we create or we pursue.
It was a really interesting approach. The character was presented in the film. Yeah, well, it was almost a child. It almost seemed like their child or in their creation, and they told their lives to the character as well. I thought it was really interesting how they used the character to draw out the personal histories of both men. That was really, really interesting to me. It became it was intriguing, wasn't it? To sort of see that it really made you kind of feel for the character in a different way, instead of just having it as a sort of present as like a mascot or something, you know what I mean? Or just like a filler. The film itself really showed the relationship, I thought, to this imaginary character, right? And really kind of gave it flesh and blood.
Yeah, I also saw, if I'm not mistaken, they were selling some books and comics from the actual comics in the sales section of the festival. They were selling like actual hardcovers and actual books of the comics. So, film translated to real life, and real life inspires film. It's kind of like another circle that goes round. No, I definitely like the aesthetic of the film, where comics are presented in this watercolor aesthetic, where it's not fully colored, but it kind of becomes filled in, so to speak, with the details as we move along. And the real life, quote unquote, it's all animated, but there is like a distinction between the two artists, the two best friends, and the comic that they're creating. There's like a visual differentiation, and it's kind of like a nice visual breather, I suppose is the best way to phrase it. It's like you can tell like when one is like the real life, quote unquote, and one is like the comic, and one is more fantastical and one is more down to earth. So I kind of really appreciate that diegesis or that distinction between the fictional world and the real world. And even though it's all animated and they both look very pretty, there is like a distinction. I kind of feel like it's an easy visual clue to follow. So I appreciate that as well. I think it's like just a wholesome, very good film. I saw like a lot of people laugh, and it was very like warm and welcoming to see like so many people around me. It was a packed audience that day. Like there's no
Right.
empty seat. I had to kind of scour into the front aisle and like one of the front aisles to get an empty seat there. I got lucky because I kind of came down a little almost past starting time, but it worked out in the end. So, I got to see the film. And I think everybody else enjoyed it. I think it's like meant to be something that kids can enjoy because of the visuals and like the dynamic of the young kid character. But then I think adults would also appreciate the adult characters' perspectives of not only creating art, but being partners in this creation process. And I think that's very inspirational for any adult who's in the animation industry or in any artsy industry in general to have like this mutual camaraderie where you're trying to do something, you're trying to work towards something, and you inspire one another, and you kind of have vigorous for this energy or for this passion. And I really enjoyed the dynamic again. It's really nice.
Yeah, it was really lovely. And even not really knowing very much about the actual, this is my first introduction to the comic strip. I didn't really know Little Nicholas at all. So even not knowing that,
Yeah, it was
really
definitely
enjoyable.
yeah, like I agree. I actually didn't know much or anything about this comic. I didn't even know it was a comic technically in the reality as opposed to like just being in a fictional world until after the fact. So I think for that sense too, it's really beginner friendly. It's really open to all audiences. You don't really need to know the deep history about the lore. Of the movie does a good job of kind of bit by bit explaining where this idea came from, and it's very beginner friendly or very openly accessible. You don't have to worry about knowing everything before you go in. And I'm sure if you knew more about the stories or if you knew in-depth knowledge, you probably appreciate the little nuances in the background or like any Easter eggs, so to speak. I'm sure there must have been something because it does seem like authentically representing the actual source material. So if anybody is listening, if you could tell me there is Easter eggs or any kind of hidden background scenes that are representing real life or a real comic, I would love to hear that. But yeah, no, I just think it was very nice and I really enjoyed it.
The art editor of the New Yorker, who started in 1993, spoke about the history of the illustrator with the New Yorker and his approach to, generating this artwork. They spoke of him and his humble character and background, and the fact he was an avid bike rider, and like many animators and cartoonists, an observer of the human condition and life. And they really focused on how he was a Parisian man in New York, didn't really speak English, but had this observant quality. He was able to, using this quality, was really able to capture New York City in a special way that all New Yorkers admired. I thought that those sensibilities, those artistic sensibilities, were really reflected in the film. The watercolor transitions were really lovely, right? Tools that were utilized to tell the story. I don't know, it was just it was neat to get a little bit of a background on the illustrator, in this panel.
That's great. Did anybody, out of curiosity, was there any interesting questions asked at the panel that you want to share details on, or just anything that comes into attention?
I thought this was really interesting. He talked about the passage from one era into another, black and white into color, and then also still images to movement. That's very special.
Yeah, that there was definitely a passage of time in the movie itself. If you notice, there's like a 20 or 30, there's like several decades gap from one point to another, so there is like a distinctive passage of time where there's like a lot of changes, and the movie kind of it's kind of told a little out of order, but I think intentionally so, where the creative aspect or the comic is being told with a timeless nature, but the real world has its own real world time period to it. But I kind of like that separation too, because it kind of reflects on the idea of a story or a comic or a piece of art inherently is timeless by nature, because unless there's like a time period attached to it, but even so, it doesn't have to be seen as reflective of that time period specifically. It could be reflective of any time period, whereas the people who made that art or were creating that work of comics, they would be more growing and aging as the time goes on. So it's kind of like an interesting separation too, because little Nicholas doesn't really grow up inherently. He stays the same age throughout the movie, and that's kind of part of the nature of the character, because he is a creation of the artist. It's not
Right.
something he ages into.
That's right. And they talk about death, right, at the
Yeah.
end. And it was really touching when Le Petit Nicolas says, will I die too? And the illustrator says, oh no, you'll live forever. And he's like, yeah. But it was really something. They were sort of at the piano on this idea of passing from one era to the other. I guess Jean-Jacques never touched a computer. You know what I mean? And so they still did the film in a hand-drawn way, but it was hand-drawn digital. But that was something that was brought up actually as part of question in the discussion the next day. Really beautiful film.
That's very admirable too, because I think that even though it's not like 100% authentic to what the actual materials would have been like, even the emulation of the technique is still valid. If you use digital tools or physical tools, I think at the end of the day, it has less importance of the tools you use as opposed to what you make with the tools. So if the tools that you make can make a watercolor, it doesn't really matter if it's actual watercolors or a digital emulation of watercolors. I think the end product still looks great, and I think that's a very admirable thing to do regardless, because animation of any capacity is a time-intensive process. I'm sure it took them quite a long time to make the animated move sequences as well. So it's very admirable. I think it's just a matter of experimentation and trying to see, or I guess trying to use the tools we have currently to see how they can be adapted to make different presentations of medium without necessarily going too old school, I suppose, too. Although maybe that's going to be the next step for them, or that could be another challenge for someone else to do a watercolor animated picture completely out of watercolor. I want to see that.
This took a lot of time. Financing took a lot of time.
I'm sure.
It took about 2 years of work, and I think they said about 300 people, which is just, a little factoid that I wrote down from the discussion.
I'm sure, like you could tell, just like it's a labor of love, and it had to have a lot of people involved to make the labor functional. So.
Did you check out the exhibition of New Yorker color covers? First room as you entered. I guess there were New Yorker color covers. It's just a really nice exhibit. It's a really nice combination of things at the festival as well, to have, the film, which is really lovely, in that beautiful theater.
Yeah.
And then have the discussion, then also an exhibit of the works. A really nice combination.
Yeah, it all connects together kind of to be like a combination of an experience. So you see a movie, and then you see the comics based on the movie, and then you see the art that inspired the direction for the movie. It's kind of like all, again, kind of a collaborative experience. Basically, you can see one separately, but I think it definitely helps to see all of them combined to kind of get the full picture of what they went through to kind of make the movie come to life. And yeah, I did see the New Yorker panel, and I noticed it was kind of both the New Yorker covers and then just some landscapes and floral gardens and just like a lot of like sketchy color paintings or watercolor paintings. And it's very vibrant and I personally live by the motto of art should be emulative of reality, but it shouldn't be imitative, which means basically if you're going to do art, try to emulate the feeling of life without copying and pasting verbatim what life actually looks like. Because especially right now in like the age of so many tools we can do, so many different art pieces, I think experimentation or just kind of doing your own style, what you see in the world, can be like a nice visual new visual feast for the eyes, basically, because I feel we could already see for ourselves what the real world looks like. What's your interpretation of how the real world looks like? And I kind of feel like the New Yorker covers in that gallery section was kind of representative of that idea of like emulating this life without being too necessarily photorealistic. And I really like that gallery. It was really pretty, and I like the colors, especially the garden and the green landscapes. It was really kind of my cup of tea. So really reflected that that talent for observation that they talked about. Yeah, because art at the end of the day has to be a matter of what you see, and you had to present that to other people for other people to see as well. So it's kind of like you see something, you make something, and other people see that what you made. It's kind of like a chain of events that leads to something being produced. So yeah, we can discuss the next segment about the Friday night. It was Best of Annecy, yes. Best of Annecy 2022. So that was like they even gave like a preface that this is meant for mature audiences, and I think that was very warranted. Some of the choices of shorts were very good, but they had a lot of meat to it. Not to be punny, but there's like a interesting direction of storytelling in some of them. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Annie has Animation Nights New York has maybe presented some of these shorts in the past as well.
Yes, I specifically, the record was definitely something we just recently,
From a few months ago,
78.
I think, yeah.
Yes.
I remember that
77.
distinctly because it was like a black and white showcase. It was a musical, and not ensemble, but it was like a musically backed piece, kind of showcasing for example, in this one short, of course, the story of like a young, I guess like a middle-aged man, he seemed like, who's kind of using music to kind of go back in time and having memories reflected upon himself. And it's kind of like a magic record. So every time he plays his record, it's a new memory and a new music interlude. So it's kind of like a interesting dynamic or parallel, because there is some, I'm thinking about like a scientific study that some people have quoted, that memory connected to sound is very strong, that even in old age, one of the closest links to our past is the sounds we hear. So it could be like music, it could be a voice, it could be like random instrumentals. Music and sound in general are strongly linked to memory. So that to me is kind of what the short was conveying, this idea of like a music being linked to his admittedly kind of sad, bittersweet past, but it was still kind of being presented to the audience in like this very eye-catching and very intriguing way, in like this literally black and white until the end way, actually, because it was kind of morose and very somber until the turning point of the end, where it becomes full of life and full of color. So that definitely, probably because I've seen it again at Annie before too, but I think getting to see it again at this festival kind of really made me appreciate it all the more, the nuances and like the hidden, not literary because it's not literature, but like artistic meanings behind it.
Yeah, I really liked that film a lot. It was nice to see. It's always thrilling to, like, inevitably every year there's some overlap in curation, and I love it because I love their curation. And some of these other films, oh my goodness, it was a powerful lineup. Let's just say that. I mean, should we talk about each one? Persona by Signe Moon from South Korea. I thought it was really well done. Really well animated and terrifying, but in a way that, you know, can help motivate people and create, you know, conversation.
I think every single one of these can create a conversation in their own right. It's like the next one was like a good lengthy short film. It was like a 20-minute short film, kind of like about these mysterious islanders, the origins of them, and what happens when an outside expedition crew comes onto the island and finds these old men. This film is called Terra Incognita, and by they're Pernille and Adrian Dexter. It's a 20-minute short film, kind of like sort of almost like a pseudo-religious origin story about this deity who creates sub beings, and then the sub beings have to survive on their own, and then an outside world comes to investigate. It's like a lot of steps in between.
So
obviously.
strange. I mean, most of the time through the film, I just thought, like, what is going on? Like what I kept trying to find the plot, to be honest. Like I was kind of, but it wasn't, it's not like I was like, oh, this film, where's the narrative? It was kind of like, it was definitely an experience, you know what I mean? Like I liked it all in all, but I have to say, I couldn't tell at some points, just on my own take, like first view, you know, what is the story? Where are we going? And then when the researchers show up, it's like, what? It's almost like there was a sticker was added to the storyline. You know what I mean? You're kind of like, is this like, is this humorous? Is this like, definitely the audience found it funny. I mean, I did too, but it was kind of like a bit of a shock value. You know what I mean? It just took this weird turn, and then there was this sort of like drama element, but it reminded me of, like, you know, Saturday morning cartoons in a way, like where you just kind of like, except that you didn't know what the heck was going on. So there was an element of that. There was like another variable, and the art itself had this like kind of strange the colors were really interesting and weird. I mean, all in all, I really liked it. But at the end, you're kind of left with like this question of, what is this? Why are we here? Why are they here? What did I just watch? And maybe that was part of the point.
Yeah, no, I
Definitely was
remember
intentional.
I remember a distinct comment. Someone in the front row she said, "Oh, that's way too close for comfort," or something like that. I don't know.
Hilarious.
I don't know if you remember hearing that, Yvonne, but I remember one of the women in the audience members, she was reacting to a certain scene, a frontal scene, let's just say.
Oh.
And that's too close for comfort, she said, something along those lines. And it is kind of like a not a natural film, as in like it's not, how do I explain it? It is like about the nature of these men who live on the island. There was a plot. I think there is a plot to like the sense of like the origin.
There were just like these guys that all look the same, and you're like, how are they existing? How would they? Why are they just all guys? And then of course, like the researcher shows up and says like, why are there no women? So it's almost like the characters that are just like sort of plopped down in the middle of the story that you were not expecting from another time, by the way. No warning about that. They're just like suddenly these present day people talking about their to-go orders, like dropped into the middle of this like mythology that you initially think it's going to be. You're like the whole time sort of trying to accumulate plot points, right? And it's almost like the markers ceased. You know what I mean? And suddenly there's nothing. It was just like destroyed by these researchers, and then you're like, wait a minute, does time work the same here? Like, what the heck is going on? And it was very entertaining. Like, all in all, you really got the sense that it was on purpose, you know what I mean? But it did have that like, we're gonna toy with the audience feel to me that I kind of sometimes enjoy. Because it gets you thinking.
No, it does. I think from my perspective, I can't speak for the director. There's always like, it's like a deputy author kind of saying, like, everybody has their own perspective. From my perspective, I think it's meant to be like a story about kind of isolation and how these group of people have no real indication of time except for the people who come from the outside to visit. Because there's like one scene from like these conquistadors, they come from Spain or from Europe to kind of conquer them, and they're gonna make them holy men. They want to convert them to Christianity. And then the men just give up after a day or something, because it's like not worth fighting over religion. And then a jump cuts to the future or present day, I suppose, with the researchers. So I think the implication was that the path of the time is so non-trackable to these men that it is kind of a jump for them to go from conquistadors
to researchers. You have the man and woman, and again, it was almost like television animation from the 90s or something, where she's just like puts her hand on his face and she's like, I know you want to like search for knowledge. Remember,
I know you have a spiritual awakening.
Yeah, exactly. I know you've had a spiritual awakening, and he's got the scarf, right? And then he just turns into one of them, and then the next thing you know, they're on a pool, like playing like in a band. no, but like all playing musical instruments in that circle, as I don't know what that was showing off, but it's like you're not sure whether or not to pay close attention or laugh.
I think people were laughing because they were confused. That's kind of like a reaction we have with like uncomfortable or awkward situations. And I think for the end of the day, to laugh is to laugh. So if he makes you laugh,
totally. And it becomes almost like an experiment about human nature in the end, because like to repeat myself, like it's intentional. It's all intentional because it's animation, and I find that fascinating too. I think I liked it. It was a journey.
Yeah, for sure.
It was a journey. Steakhouse by Spila Kades from,
I think that's how you pronounce
Slovenia, Germany, France.
That was the meat of this. I keep saying that joke, but that was kind of like a story about like almost like a revenge story in like a subtle way. I felt like, because I felt it was about like this kind of, I don't want to say she's like a victim necessarily, but she is kind of the unwilling partner to this person who doesn't appreciate her that much, and she's trying her best to deal with it. Like I don't want to say we've all had the experience of like dealing with some unreasonable person, but I think that's what the story is trying to convey nonetheless, about this generally nice woman trying to deal with her like unreasonable husband, and then he gets his comeuppance at the end because of his own
Yeah.
wrongdoing, let's say. Like karma gets him.
That's a very kind and delicate way to describe it, because he is just a monster. And what was interesting about this piece is to me that, well, besides what happens in it, is the weird foggy lighting that they chose that started out with this dinner that is burned, and then his tantrum that just he rages out, and you can they turn him into almost like a creature, right, where he's chewing and chewing and chewing, and there are all these like close-ups of the mouth, and then the smoke in the room from the burned steak, and he's like cooked to perfection, right? And then there's that weird fog where I was just like, what the heck is this? Like, you can't see the characters, but it almost was like that soft Martha Stewart lighting, or like soap opera lighting that it turned into, but it kept going. And I was just like, what is this? And it was almost like confusing because I didn't quite know what was going on. And it got to that they pushed that to just to the point where, at least for me, timing wise, where I was like, about to go like, I don't get this. Where is this going? But the animation was so good that, you wanted to keep watching it to see, and then things just take a turn and you're like, oh my gosh. And it was really very powerful. And that's another one that would fit right in with our programming. I was just like, that's one of my favorites. Steakhouse.
Definitely like recommended to you, just for like anyone who wants to see like not a villain per se, but maybe that is the best way to describe this person who gets us come up into the end. And I kind of appreciate like justice, because some of these shorts or some of these movies, we'll talk about it as it comes. I felt like there was like a little bit of no justice at the end. It was kind of like sad because some of my favorite characters were dying off, and then some of them, we'll talk about it later, I'm sure.
You're like, where is my revenge? Wood was really cool. At first, it seemed like it was artfully done, of course. It's kind of like sort of carving, and
was it real wood, or was it just a CGI replica of a wood? I feel like it was real, because they show like a shot of like the actual granular structure.
It sure did seem like it was. Yeah, I wondered about that as well. At first, I thought it was just a series of carvings and reliefs that were telling a story. That's kind of how it started, almost like a sort of slideshow. And I was just like, okay, this is artful, but where is it going to go? And then it's another film that just took a turn, and you were just like, oh my God, this is gorgeous. There's just like, so, with the
little mannequin guy you're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But suddenly the animation, it just sort of everything popped out of the wood, and I don't know if that was stop motion or CG, or it kind of doesn't even matter. Like it was just, the animation was really powerful. It was really well done. So I like that film a lot in the end. And then Anxious Body
I think we showed this too at Animation Nights New York, haven't we? I feel, or was it like a different program? Or forgive me if I'm mistaken, but I feel like I've seen this before too, either through Annie or through some other form, because I definitely remember that weird snake being cut with the tongue kind of snake sequence.
So I think there are a couple of films that are similar to it. I went home and dug in a little bit to Yuriko Mizushiri to see if this director had worked on other films that we had shown, because there is a similarity, definitely. I don't believe we showed this film at Animation Nights New York, but another one that would fit right in. And it almost reminded me of like ASMR for tactile things, wasn't it? That's what it reminded me of. Yeah, you could just relate to the tactile experience of something that you were looking at. Like, how freaking cool is that? So effective. And the audience really responded to every little sticky autonomous sensory meridian response, a tingling sensation that usually begins in the scalp, moves down the neck, compared with auditory tactile synesthesia. Yeah, it reminded me of that, like the videos where it's all about sort of like sound that creates a response, right? And some people are more susceptible to it, but it's like, you know, click, click, clicks and scratches and all of this stuff. But this was strictly visual, right? Actually, I don't really remember the audio track very much in it. Maybe it just blended together really well. It didn't stand out to me per se, but the visuals were just so highly effective.
I think the audio was like hollow, or not hollow, but like it was echoey or intentionally like distorted to make it more noticeable, like when she's cutting the tape, or when she's like pinching the tape and it's plopping off her finger, like
right.
like it's making like auditory signals that something is happening physically with the scene.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, all your focus was on what this would feel like, and it was just cool. It was just cool. But yeah, that's it. That was what I kept thinking sort of all the way through it. But An Anxious Body is a really good title. Amok by Balazs Turay. That was great. I loved that film. That was another wild ride. Horror, love story. There was gore, but it was beautiful and it was action packed. I really liked it. I liked the conclusion, how it sort of tied up. Yeah, I really liked that one a lot.
I think it was a musical too. Well, it had some musical songs in it, if I recall. There was like some, surprisingly so, because this was presented, or this was advertised as like no dialogue or commentary, but there's like some songs with lyrics in this. Yeah. Kind of like a tongue-in-cheek. Obviously, it's not really like a Disney musical. It's much more sinister than Disney. Yeah. But no, I appreciated this. I guess the one context, and this might be like spoiler territory, I just want to know, like, was the context that this character, let's say, had been dealing with his demons all his life, or was it just something that came up at the beginning, that unexpectedly?
So, I mean, my takeaway at the end, because he spoilers, because he sort of meets his match in the end and meets another demon like character, it's almost like you find whatever is closest to you know, your one, or as Dan Savage says, you round up. But like to meet someone who sort of gets you, even as simply, it's just as simple as that. I mean, there was like murder and demons and hellscape, like for sure. But I feel like sort of speaking to this like idea of like everyone has a darkness, or everyone has serious issues. And you know what I mean? Like for me, it was kind of, and maybe that's how I always sort of take these types of stories, unless there's like really serious murder, you know what I mean? Something like really problematic. But for me, it was just kind of,
it's kind of like edgy, one of those things, and punky.
Yeah, almost. It was exactly. So that kind of made you think that there was actually kind of like a kind of more lighthearted theme. that was the end result of it for me. Yeah, that was my takeaway.
That was like the closing short of the night, so I'm sure it got people revved up as they were leaving.
They're like, what is my demon comprised of? Yeah, I like that one a lot. It was a good closer. And then on Saturday, we kind of split things down the middle through most of the day. I caught most of the panels and work in progress, and you caught the shorts and feature. And then we both were in the theater for the films and for the Q&A for Blind Willow, Sleeping Woman, and then for the film Unicorn Wars, another wild ride, which we can talk about.
Yeah, if you want me, I can do like a brief super brief overview of what we saw, or I saw at the animated shorts for kids section.
Awesome.
You know, it was obviously meant for kids or younger audiences. There was no gore, there's no demons, there's no punky violence in any of them. It was just wholesome family shorts. So I actually wanted to shout out to one visually interesting animated short, and you know, the visuals were really impressive. I don't know if it's possible to see it because it did say on the agenda, or the itinerary, let's say, that it was a New York premiere, so I have doubts if it's available online. But Cap and Moth, the short from the kids section of the uh best shorts for kids for best of Annecy Kids 2022, that was like a visual feast. Like it reminds me of like if you ever saw Into the Spider-Verse or Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, it was a very similar style of like a comic book kind of come to life with that same painterly, slightly slower frames, but very visually impressive. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think Disney is taking a foray into that look too, and DreamWorks did that look as well recently with their Puss in Boots sequel. So you know, more and more studios are doing this look, so I think it's becoming more of like a, you know, thing to do. But that was like a visual feast. Like if it's possible to see the short, I would recommend that short of this selection, because that was like really like it's like a essentially like a variant of a Tom and Jerry cartoon, but like the visuals are like mind-blowingly awesome. Like the only thing that was like a little bit confusing was the ending, because I felt like the ending was kind of asking more questions and answering questions. But you know, for like a younger audience, for like a general wholesome vibe, it was really like I want to see it again, because I just want to explain to you scene by scene like how the scene looks amazing, or that shot looks great, or that color palette is awesome. Like there's so many like visual eye-catching feats from this short, and I that was like my favorite of the bunch. And you know, the others were really cool too. I think actually one of them was replayed at a different section, so we can maybe touch base on about it later. A Story for Two Trumpets, which was the one about that started off with a girl in a river singing with a duck. I'm not sure if you saw that, but they replayed this one too. It was kind of like an abstract thought about growing up and having experiences with like sadness and being overwhelmed with emotion, that kind of feeling. So that's the vibe I got from that. That was also noteworthy. And the last one was kind of like this really cute not allegory, but like story about like a fox who's inadvertently connecting people by sending love letters to the townspeople, and people are too shy to talk about their feelings. And it's kind of like a happy ending because the fox helps, spoiler alert, helps everybody get with their partner at the end. So it's kind of like a love story that the fox helps out with, basically. And it's like a really nice storybook kind of look. So no, I liked everything in the kids shorts. Like, and I think that's always important to like emphasize, like just because it's marketed as a kid section doesn't mean an adult like myself or anyone else cannot take something out of it. I got a lot out of these shorts, so I would really recommend like the ones I've spoken about most profusely right now, like Cat and Moth and the Story for Two Trumpets, and the last one was the Queen of the Foxes, which was the love story one. So I recommend all of them at least once, because I do think they're like visually appealing and just like nothing to criticize in terms of like story. They're all worth at least one time seeing, just to see the experience of it.
Luce and the Rock.
Yes.
Britt Raes was one of our animation or Annie Best of Fest winners. She did Catherine, the film Catherine.
That was her style. Oh my god.
So I know. Isn't that
that's
cool?
why I like that short actually too. I don't want to go too again. I want to be cognizant of time, but no, that was like a really great, cute, wholesome short about kind of like acceptance of different people, stop being afraid of the unknown, venture into a new kind of realm and help each other out. Like that was really nice. And it's interesting because in that short they have like this emphasis of dark versus light. The little child character is very scared of the dark, and he has like a nightlight he holds. And it's kind of interesting what they do, because in the night scenes, whenever he has a nightlight, it illuminates around him, and he goes around to the darkness and he lights up the darkness, basically. And it's like a visual like contrast. And I really like it, because it's kind of just like a nice, again, not purely realistic of real life. A real life light would be more dispersive, but this, in the visual context, I just like the idea of like singling out this like light source in the darkness and kind of opening up the world and stop not being so afraid of the unknown. And it was really wholesome. I really like that. She's
brilliant at those integrating allegory into the visual aspects of her shorts. Really, Catherine did a same type of thing, like with the
Yes.
sort of cats in the houses and safety. And yeah, she's brilliant. I'm a big fan.
She should try to showcase Annie now, because now if she's already done one, I think this might be a good contender for like another showcase if she was like
yeah.
I don't know like if that's possible given the schedule. But no, like that's why I appreciate the style, because I was like, this, I didn't know it in the back of my mind it was the same person, but now I'm like, oh, that makes sense, because it does look similar.
Yeah.
But okay, thank you for letting me know that. Actually, I appreciate
go on,
that.
Britt Raes. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah,
that's
so
really
that was
really cool.
Everything was enjoyable from that section, so no complaints there. The next one I saw, just very, again, I don't want to eat up too much time here, but I saw the Black Pharaoh, the Savage, and the Princess, which was the US premiere of a film. It's an anthology film with different historical lenses, and it's kind of like interesting what they do with each one. And the first one is kind of like this ancient civilization, the Pharaoh. He's trying to become the Pharaoh of all of Egypt. He's trying to win the heart of his princess. They all have like some royalty theme or some like connection to like a royal or like noble lineage that's kind of like a fairy tale-esque in a way. So the first one's like this pharaoh, or this soon-to-be pharaoh, trying to prove himself, become the top name of Egypt, trying to win the heart of his true love. The second one is kind of like this very interesting story because it's told entirely in dark silhouette. It's like not black and white, because there is light coming from the windows and there is like a forest scene, there's like atmosphere, but there's no coloration of the characters themselves. They're only done in black silhouette. And that was like almost like shadow puppets in a way. I felt like it was kind of telling the story of evil father who kicks out his son for doing a good thing morally, and then the son comes back later to kind of vanquish his evil father. And it's kind of like a story about the right always wins, the wrong will be punished eventually. It's kind of like, you know, like a hero success story of a way. And the last one was like an Arabian Nights inspired story where this ex-prince gets exiled and he meets a princess in this foreign kingdom and they fall in love. They send messages to each other through beignets. They're like love at first sight, and then they send love messages to each other, and he sneaks into the palace to find her. So it's kind of like this Arabian Nights a story about these two lovebirds who are trying to get together despite she's a princess and he's an ex-prince, but they're trying to be with each other regardless of the consequences, and they all have happy ending. It's just like it's like a tribulation story for each section. The anthology is basically about a main character trying to overcome trials and tribulations and trying to overcome any burdens and like hurdles, and then they overcome them at the end. And it's all connected by the storyteller who's telling a modern day audience the stories of the pharaoh, the princess, and the savage. So she's like the narrator for all these stories in a sense. So the visuals is not like, how would I explain it? Like, I wouldn't say it's my favorite of the festival, because I do have more prominent favorites of the festival for visuals, but I think narrative wise it's just like an interesting experiment to see the same kind of, I don't want to say South Park, because that's kind of very distinctly adult and very and not for kids. This is definitely a family film. It's not meant to be like one age range only. The animation first film that I saw, but it's kind of a similar paper cutout look, and each one takes something different with it. Like the first one does more like an ancient mythology or ancient, almost like carvings in the wall kind of aesthetic. And then the second one does shadow silhouettes, and then the third one does like a Arabian influence. So I felt like each one, to the best of its animation range, does like something unique with the paper cutout style, with the no outline style, let's say. Like some other mediums have done it too. I think Rémi Chayé, we saw like a film by Rémi Chayé a couple years ago.
Do you remember Michel Ocelot he was the guest of honor in 2019.
Right.
You remember Candy Kugel had a conversation with him. They were focusing on Kirikou and the Sorceress.
Okay, that 2019, I'm not sure if I was in that panel specifically, because that was a while ago. But
yeah. I had to look it up because I was just like, oh, wait a minute, that rings a bell. I was just
that's interesting.
That was wasn't off the top of my head. That was me like going, wait a minute.
So he's like an animation first regular in this point.
He was the guest of honor in 2019. So they showed Kirikou and the Sorceress, and then there was a conversation with him.
Was there any talk about this film being made, or because this one is a new film that came out in 2022, the Black Pharaoh, the Savage and the Princess. But is there any like behind the scenes?
That's the link. You could see a couple of stills, but I mean the style is not the same as Kirikou.
It's a little different. Okay, which is fine. Everybody has
your memory. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. I wanted to bring it up. I can't remember if we were there together that year. I truly do not remember. It was pre-pandemic.
I'm not sure either because it's been a while, to be honest, but I feel like I was there for the next year, but the year before I was not available.
Anything pre-pandemic is like a lifetime ago, so it's kind of difficult. 2019 feels like it was 15 years ago, so yeah, okay.
It's all good. It's like we're all trying to remember things that happened either this week or last 2 years, so it's like
that's right.
Yeah, but basically this was like an interesting visual experiment. I like seeing filmmakers experiment with the visual style, and I think the no outline style is always something that can be kind of catered to more, because like I mentioned very briefly before, like Rémi, another filmmaker from France, Rémi Chayé, two of his films, Long Way North and the Calamity Jane film he made.
Right, sure, yeah.
Had no outlines. And also, interestingly, we talked, me and Yvonne had talked about this. Tangled, the series from Disney, also had this experimentation with no outlines in their animation style. So it is kind of like a more niche style because it is kind of more distinct. It can look stiff if it's not handled in the right way or not in the right direction. But I felt this film did the visuals very well with the terms of motion and direction and physicality. So it's not too stiff, it's not too unnatural. It does look like characters moving. And it does, but just have its distinction of looking like cutouts. So
like shadow puppets or like older stop motion films.
Exactly. So yeah, I did appreciate that style of the film for doing so. Like it's never gonna be like, how do I explain it? Like it's never gonna be enough to see just one film. I wish more people would experiment with this kind of style and see if they can do new things or try new angles. You know, it's always like worth experimentation. So I think the fact that they did this film in this style is always like worth praising because it is something that's kind of a niche thing, I think, and it doesn't have to be niche necessarily. Yeah, so that was that film, and then I saw the new Francophone shorts program #1 at Saturday at 3:45. They had a repeat of one of the shorts from the Best of Animation Annecy Kids, so that was like it double dipped, but that must mean it's really good, I suppose. That was the trumpet short, the Story for Two Trumpets short again.
Right.
And so I think there's like a lot of visual intrigue here as well. I felt like a lot of them had like a black and white or kind of more gloomy aesthetic, but not in like it morose, not being like depressing necessarily, but more like investigative, like a sadder environment. Like for example, one of the shorts was about these teens having a party, and one of the girls is playing spin the bottle with the boys, and she ends up being girlfriends with this boy, but then it comes out that she actually likes her best friend, which is another girl. So it's kind of like this pseudo love triangle kind of thing where these people are in relationships that they don't want to be in, but they can't really be with each other because they don't know how to communicate their feelings too well. It's kind of like a glimpse into like a teenage party. Teenage years were very far away from me now. Like it was like a decade ago at this point, but I feel like it's like a very raw kind of look into this perspective of kids trying to navigate relationships and trying to navigate their own feelings and being confused about how to navigate their own feelings, because it's like a lot of layers basically, and that film I'm talking about with the teenage party was called Inglorious Laesians. And it's interesting too because all the characters have like a light switch for nose. So all the faces were like light switches. So it's I don't know if that's supposed to be metaphorical. It's just like an art style, but I like the story nonetheless. So it was really nice to see. And another one I saw, which was I think the first one of that screening or that section, was Slipping Away, which was about a gentleman, like an old senior citizen who lives on a beach resort or a beach senior citizen center, and he makes friends with a pigeon. and this becomes like his newest best friend. It's like a really sweet like friend story basically, where the seagull becomes his friend too, and he takes care of the seagull like it's his own child, and he kind of keeps a secret from the caretakers because the caretakers are kind of very persnickety about making sure he doesn't go too far. It's like just like a nice helping the bird fly again story with this old man and the bird.
I wanted to mention, that sounds really cool. The director of Inglorious Liaisons.
Yes.
She is also the director, and you'll recognize the characters of Two Nuances.
Ooh,
We
cool.
played it at Animation Nights New York back when we were at 180 Maiden Lane.
Oh, was that like a woman's story kind of
Yes.
animation short of like how it's like to be a woman? I think that's the one we're talking about. Like it was like just like the hardships or like the life of a woman from like a raw perspective, kind of.
Like women are talking, there were women talking about their girlfriends and like aspects they really liked about their partners.
If that's the case, that means she's really adept and really skilled at doing kind of these emotionally pertinent stories about, well, in the story that was at this festival, it's about like two teenage girls, but in general, like she has like a good grasp of like emotional connectivity, how to connect, how do people connect with one another, how do they connect to their friends versus their relationships, things like that. It's kind of like an interesting realistic take on that.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to what we were talking about before, where, you know, like animators, cartoonists, like they're really primarily before all of the art skills, part of the craft is observing human behavior and reflecting on it, and then taking in that information, and as you said, is most importantly expressing their feelings about, you know, places, people, places, and things.
Yeah, no,
she is
it's
adept.
great. It is really great. Like again, we're kind of breezing through this because there is so much to talk about, but
Sure,
I
yeah.
guess one more short that came to mind, it was like a black and white short called Letter to a Pig. It's about the premise starts out basically, just very briefly, about this man who survived the Holocaust and how he escaped capture by hiding in a pig's pen, and the pig he thought helped him out, and he always hated pigs before that moment, and now he feels grateful for the pig to protect him. And then he's telling the story to a group of kids in a classroom, and some of the kids are more serious about this than other kids. Some of them are just making fun of the story about like, oh, a pig saved you, you know, like they don't take it seriously. And then it's like focused on this one girl who's kind of taking it very seriously. And I it would be kind of like a matter of like, if you saw it, it'd be easier to describe. But there is kind of like this investigation of her internal psyche, how the more he tells about the story of surviving the Holocaust, the more intimidating the more scared she becomes. And then there's like this segue into her reliving his life, kind of trying to find like escape from captors. And then there's like a story about, or a side story, or like a part of the story is from that angle, is basically the pig the villain or the hero. And it's kind of like an interesting cultural, I suppose, aspect too, where like even the narrator of the story says that he did not like pigs because he was raised to think of them as filthy or dirty or not worthy of praise. But then because he got saved by one, or he felt that his life was saved because a pig cared about his life, it was like very happenstance, let's say. But it's kind of like, is the pig the hero or the victim in this tale? And it's kind of like a metaphorical perspective of like, these kids are listening to the story, and this one girl specifically, she's absorbing the story and she's taking this into extreme depths, and like she's kind of scared and kind of intimidated by the experiences, and I think she's reliving it in secondhandedly basically. And the ending was a bit up to interpretation, if I guess if she's conquering her fears versus just feeling guilty about the past, because it's kind of like a interpretive situation where certain fears are either conquered or they're not conquered, they're actually harmed because they were never supposed to be fears in the first place. It's like I'm sure there's like a lot more story behind the scenes to what it seems like a very autobiographical or biographical story, because it's like about this teacher, or I guess the narrator, this man who survived this horrible situation, relaying his experiences to kids, and the kids have to live it second-handedly. So I'm sure there's like a bigger crux of the story, because it is kind of a story that unfortunately many people can relate to or have historical precedent for. And basically the visuals are really not monotone, like black and white quite literally, but also kind of in a moral aspect. There's kind of like this questioning of who is the victim, who is the abuser, what is the line between the two, is it okay to be afraid versus to not conquer your fear. It's very interpretive. I don't want to like be too abstract, because again, it is sort of an abstract film as well. Like it's meant to be like you see it as you see it necessarily. It's not really a strict narrative. But that was like the one, I think, another highlight. I think people who would appreciate it will be kind of going into it with this mindset of you can interpret the answer or the ending as you will. It's not going to be right or wrong, because I don't think there is a right or wrong in terms of like a morality or like in terms of like a concrete yes or no. So basically I like the visual style. I like the narrative. I like that there is no clear answer. There's no obvious yes or no, basically, or there is no definitiveness. And I think that can make an interesting plot, or that can make an interesting animation. Sometimes having no answers answered can make it more intriguing to remember. So it was like a string. And that was again Letter to a Pig, and the director was Tal Contour of France and Israel for 16 minutes. I don't know if it's available, or if it was a New York premiere at the festival, so it might be available one day. If that's something of your interest, you can scout it out. But yeah, and you know, all these shorts have their own unique aspects, so I don't want to be like nitpicking or like saying this one or this one. Like I guess it's all like a personal preference, and the best way to get personal preference is to like scout it out and see if you are interested in your own rights, you know, on your own terms, basically. That was the Francophone shorts, the program one. There was more to it, obviously, but
Sofia El Khyari, who did Shadow of the Butterflies. I believe she is another Fanny filmmaker. She did Ayam, about generations of Moroccan women exchanging feelings and anecdotes while preparing the traditional ceremony. I just read that from the but that was another name I recognized. I just thought I'd throw that out there as, I don't know, as additional information, you know.
No, that's great to know though. Sofia El Khyari has done animation screening in the past, or has had her work shown in the past. Okay. Yeah.
So that's just kind of neat.
I'm sure there's like crossover. It's exciting. Because ANNY has an international presence, and this is kind of an international festival. So I would not be surprised. You know, I'm not.
It's just nice to see names. It's just nice to see repeated names. So much talent in the world. So much talent. So exciting. Okay, great.
That was a Francophone, and I think after that we were both at the screening of Blind Willow Sleeping Woman at 6 p.m. So I guess you could start out, because I want to like give you a chance to speak, because I spoke a bit already about the past two screenings.
So I'll just say a few words about the work in progress that I saw. We already sort of talked about Le Petit Nicolas, and mentioned the panel discussion that was really interesting, and definitely gave some background of that film. The Siren looks like it's going to be a really beautiful film. I had a chance to speak with the director afterwards, and we saw the work in progress, sort of some shots from the film. She talked about process. She talked about what it was about. It's really about the Iran-Iraq war, sort of a 1 month long period of a 15-year-old character named Omid. It's very beautifully designed. There's a real graphic element. It's kind of beautiful looking, but very graphic and stylized, sort of like a flat 2D layered look. And they really did a ton of research and tried to recreate places that existed during that time. It looks like a beautiful film. I'm really excited to see it. It takes place in a few months after the opening of the war. Yeah, we saw a bit of the trailer. They didn't want like a 3D look or a cartoony look. A lot of you see this in some films where like the characters themselves are designed in a 3D way and they're rigged as 3D characters, but they're in a 2D space. So it's all very, the overall sort of look is really 2D. I think that can be a bit challenging to like find appealing poses. You're kind of, you know what I mean, to use a 3D rig that way, but it looked very interesting. The color palette was something that they really focused on. As the war sort of increased, the palette was even more and more limited. So there really is a focus on design and palette. I had a chance to speak to the director after the talk, and actually what was really interesting is, you know, she has a history of doing live action film and not a history of doing animated film. And that part really fascinated me because, you know, I'm always interested in sort of, you know, speaking to people to gather information about, you know, what makes a successful project, you know what I mean? And particularly with directors who are maybe, you know, don't have a history of animation necessarily. I really wanted to sit down and chat with her about her process and what she was learned and what the pipeline looked like. And actually, we're going to sit down and have a lengthy conversation about that. But I got to have a little intro talk with her during the festival. Yeah, she has a background as a mathematician as well. And I think that really helped her approach. She's also done some collage work. So it's not as though animation was completely foreign to her process. The more I spoke with her, the more it seemed like she seems like the perfect person to talk to about this, you know. But I was really interested in sort of learning how she approached like the animation language, you know, and how you learn about animation and sort of get things done if you're not, you know, an animator yourself. I find that fascinating, and I couldn't find you, but she and I sat and watched the Unicorn Wars. So I'm glad we were all at that screening. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to seeing the Siren, and I think it's going to be really interesting. Hopefully it'll, you know, maybe play next year at the FIAF Animation First Festival.
Yeah, and this was just to clarify, this was the panel on Saturday at 12:30.
Yes, the film was the Siren, work in progress of the Siren, a conversation with Sepide Farsi. You know, was very interesting. It was great to speak to her afterwards. Definitely looking forward to that as well.
Great.
I wanted to say just a couple words about Chicken for Linda.
Yes.
Which, I mean, the name is fantastic. That was really interesting to me. So it was a conversation with Chiara Malta and Sebastian Laudenbach. So we didn't really we got to see a section of a song and sort of bits and pieces of studies. I'm not sure what the film is about, except that there's a mother and daughter, there's a building for kids. The film is, according to the directors, a film which is a tribute to children, but not for children. And they said some things at first that were like these kind of heady points where they'd say like, oh, this is not animation. Oh, I'm not interested in animation. I'm like, okay, where are we going with this? But what was fascinating is there really was something to what they were saying. Like the focus was really on like capturing moments of life, right? And it was really about like sound and improvisation and giving the actors space to play and improvise and be in the moment, right? Like capturing these moments in life. And then the result was almost like this kind of almost like rotoscope, but with incomplete lines. And I don't know if that will be like the very end result necessarily, but what I saw so far looked, you know, it had like a looseness, right? A looseness of style, coupled with the soundtrack, which was so improvised and like, well, full of life, to be honest. It was just very it felt like they just really captured these moments in time. Now, part of my mind was like, okay, well, but animation does that. Animation is creation of, breathing life into something, right? You're using observation and technique and in order to create weight and, like how can, I have problems with sort of rotoscript techniques sometimes because you just see everything kind of dies a little bit, like, but with this, what they were doing was not that. It really was kind of felt very like fresh and lively. I don't know how to, I'm very excited to see it. I really am. And looks like a really interesting project. So I hope that we see more of that next year.
Yeah.
More than an experiment, it felt like an art piece. All of these things, they're art pieces, right? They're creating like this third element, right? They're layered, right? There's something to peel back. So that's what always gets me excited about these work in progress panels. Like I always want to go to them because it's just so nice. It's like seeing them making of, only like even better because it's like being made now. It's really pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's great. I'm glad you get to see both of them because I was doing the other two screenings at that same time, so I'm glad we got to kind of split and prioritize and kind of combat the schedule. So that's great. And I think we ended up doing both at 6 p.m. I guess I mentioned this earlier, but I guess segueing back to that point now, we saw the Willow movie. We saw director Pierre Földes, Blind Willow Sleeping Woman.
From Murakami short stories.
Yes. I guess my hot take would be that I felt like it's very faithful, I'm supposing, from the actual source material, but I wonder if it could have been more divergent in the sense of maybe picking one plot to focus on versus doing all these scattered, because I feel like one plot in this movie is like so out of this world. I kind of wonder if you know which one I'm talking about, but
the frog.
Exactly, yes. And I felt frog. Like exactly, like that plot was so intriguing to me more than the other plots, and I felt like the other plots were more like in emotional sense, like intriguing as well, but I felt like I want to get back to the frog plot because every time this movie has a dynamic of like this very charismatic, he's kind of like a renegade soldier almost in like World War II or something like that. He's trying to fight to save humanity, and then he recruits this like George Costanza like businessman almost to his army to fight against the giant evil worm. And I would have liked that plot to be fleshed out more, but I'm assuming, or I'm taking liberty of believing that it's more because they didn't expand upon that because it's trying to be faithful to the source material, and the source material had many plots, first of all, and second of all, it wasn't going deep into any of these plots. So I think that may be like, for better or for worse, just like a note about this movie. It's like some stories might be more interesting than others, or you might have like a favorite story. Yeah. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you see it, the movie kind of talks about the stories at different lens and in different paces and in different areas. There is no one linear story necessarily. There is like a connection point of all the stories taking place after a very dire tsunami earthquake. So that's kind of like the connection point, like this Mother Nature devastating event leads to other earth-shattering revelations.
Yeah, that's interesting. Although the tsunami doesn't really touch upon each story, right?
But it does with the frog.
It does with the frog. Yeah,
only the frog.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
I think you're right. Well, I mean, there were several separate stories that were tied in together. So I wonder if maybe, maybe some of them could have been omitted. I mean, that is really, really interesting.
And that's not to discredit the story. The origin as well. Like, I just felt so captivated by like this idea of like a frog and a weird random businessman trying to save the world. That could have been like an interesting expansion, but I guess the counter argument would have been it would have been disfaithful or unfaithful to the narrative that the original author wanted, which, I guess for adaptations, for any adaptation you do, whether it's like a comic to an animated movie or a book to a TV show, people are going to always like argue that, oh, this is not faithful at all. You cut out this scene and you remove that scene. But I think my counter to the counter argument is that even the director, because right after the movie was done, the director said he read the book and he enjoyed the book, and I think he picked the best stories or his favorite stories from that book because there was like a catalog of them.
Right.
Like, I think by nature of even that, it wasn't going to be faithful to the whole book because he only picked out some stories from that whole catalog. So,
yeah, but it almost becomes like a love story to Murakami.
It is.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then his sort of take on it was of his own piece was like, well, or at least the one comment that he made before the film started was about, the tsunami, life-changing events and things that make you sort of think about the decisions you've made in your life or be a better person from this point on. And they can either be real tsunamis or they can be personal tsunamis. I think that is what he tied together. Like whether that was reflected in the piece, having not heard those words, I get the part that's up for discussion, right? Like
that's true.
Like
yeah, because I feel like if we're talking about the actual tsunami that happened, only one of the stories really connects back to that. Yeah. But if we're talking about like an emotional or like tidal wave of emotions, let's say, I think every story has that kind of.
That's right. Yeah. So that tsunami touched everyone. Yeah. And then, he also talked about, I thought it was interesting, his technique of like real animation or something like that. Remember, he called it something that to me, it was like, what does that mean? I may be using the wrong word, but basically what he did is like they created 3D models of heads and then animated them and sort of attached those, I think in post or through rigging, to also rotoscope that was also had layers of animation on it. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I remember he said something like that. I wasn't taking notes, but there was like a discussion about the animation style, if rotoscoping was involved or how was the process involved. And I think he did mention like this kind of utilizing like moving heads, as you said, or kind of just incorporation of maybe not rotoscope. It could be rotoscope, but to me, it reminds me of, for example, there used to be like they're out of business now, called Telltale Games. They used to make these real-time, quick-time events.
Yeah, sure.
And those games were kind of like, not exactly in the same style, but like in a similar kind of, it looks like a real person, but there's kind of like an animation to it that's makes them a little bit more fluid / less realistic. It's hard to explain, but I feel like that might be like there's like an engine that's fueling the movements, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Or a video game engine, as it were. But
live animation. That was it. That's what he was calling it. Rotoscope animation overlay. Yeah, that's interesting. It reminds me too of like anytime you sort of use these sort of like layers of tech. Steakhouse had elements of that in the very, very, very beginning of it when you had like those fingers on the cutting board. It reminded me of, this is an old reference, but like the Pierce sisters, the short film where like there was not rotoscope, but it was CG and then painted cells on top of the CG. So you had these like, the end result was this perspective of particular elements that just highlighted those. But in the end, it just looked like this beautiful sort of painterly thing. And it was just like a combination of techniques. And I think when it's seamless, you're just kind of like, ooh, how'd they do that? Like, that looks amazing. But it also just flows seamlessly with the film. And I thought that the techniques they used did. I always hate it when there's like rotoscope and there's no weight, you know what I mean? I mean, that happens less and less because the tech is getting a little bit better, but like, when it's lifeless, you could tell. And this had like weight and it was really artfully done. So I like that about it, but yeah, that's interesting.
I guess, did you have, I guess, because I spoke about my kind of preferences or like maybe in an alternate universe or like an alternate version, I would prefer like focusing on one narrative more than the others, but did you have like any thoughts about like which narrative spoke to you the most or which story was most appealing to you?
I mean, the lost cat, I wasn't as taken by that in the end, and actually the very, very last scene, I was like, really? I'm like, how's that cat doing? No, I don't know. I'm like, I didn't really, spoilers. The cat's like in the luggage. Like, I hope they didn't ship it New York City style.
I don't know what happened. Like the ex-wife left her husband, and the same day or that same week, the cat goes missing, and miraculously the cat is in the ex-wife's new apartments somehow.
Right, but like in the luggage with the clothes, like in the luggage. All I can think is like, poor kitty.
I can only assume,
like jostled around too much, but it
I
seemed
can only
happy in
assume
the
it was
end.
like a rapid move, so it wasn't there for too long, because
Right,
it does sound like
yeah,
that she
totally.
moved away very quickly. She didn't want to be I don't know, like that's kind of
I
like
don't
one
know,
of the
but
grievances.
I mean, the bottom line is like the fact that I was even focused on that. I mean, I have to agree with you. That frog, I mean, I was like hooked when the frog appeared. It was the animation and the voice acting,
the
and
humor. I
the
felt like the humor was
humor,
like top
and
notch
just
with those
the,
scenes.
I mean, even if you had never seen the battle with the big worm, and even if it was, in his head or what, I loved that. I really liked that storyline as well. There's just something intriguing about the mental state of the banker, the end result of his like promotion, spoilers, and I agree with you. I could have seen
Yeah.
more of that storyline for
Yeah,
sure,
like
for
there's some
sure.
interesting like
They could have their own whole
potential.
own
Yeah,
series.
there's like some that was like the I felt like the most like meat of the story. Like there was like
Yeah.
so many. Cause I think that speaks most to me about the fantastical nature of like the magical realism. I think that was definitely like on the nose. That's magical realism. Like the cat plot.
Yeah.
Like, is that really magical that the cat goes missing, or is that really like fitting into the theme? Like the story. One of the stories was
I mean, the
about
love hotel scene was kind of cool, I suppose. That sort of,
yeah, but is that magical realism, or is it just like a story about like a guy trying to move on from his life because his wife is not there anymore? You know, like
yeah,
that.
with just some creepy dialogue with the girl. I mean, actually, if he had murdered her,
Wait, what?
if he had murdered her, and remember there's like this point of aggression where he was like, "Arr!" and he's like got her, and
Oh,
it's like he's gonna choke her, but he doesn't, but you're kind of like, ugh. Like it shows this other side to his character.
I didn't even think about that. That was like an internal stress, like because she told him he had no soul or something like that.
Yeah, she was
That's
like,
kind of a
what's
mean thing
in
to
the
say to
box?
someone.
What? Oh yeah, I know it. What's in the box? I think it's the lost part of you that you'll never get back. Like there were elements like that. I enjoyed the dialogue for that for
The
sure, but
dialogue is witty. It just again, I wonder
it
if
could
it
have been
really
focused
fits.
on more than
Yeah,
him. Yeah, that's
I wonder if
interesting.
it fits into the magical realism that this movie I think was trying to go for or toward with like
Huh.
I and or the plot, like for example with the ex-wife, there's like a plot about her experience being a waitress, and I'm very grateful it didn't go too far with that scene in the hotel with her manager. I think
Uh-huh.
I thought that
The
was gonna go
wish.
somewhere else,
Yeah.
and then it becomes, what do you wish for?
20
It's your
years old. I
birthday.
have a birthday present for you. Yeah, exactly.
Oh yikes! I was like, yikes, this is going in place I don't want to go. But
Right.
no. And I'm just curious, like, does she wish for like some catastrophe or something? I was like kind of confused. Well,
Oh, that's interesting.
like,
I
because
did
it's
not.
when she makes a wish, and then it flashes to her, I guess, boyfriend at the time going to a car accident or something,
Right.
and then
I gotta watch this movie again. I feel like I need to watch it again. Uh,
that was magical realism, I guess, but it's also kind of like glossed over almost. Like we never go back to like how she feels, or she says, "Oh, you
yeah.
can't talk about your birthday," where it's like a private thing, and like, but
Right.
that's
And
not
the guy
fun.
she's talking to is like, I know
Who
you're
is
not
that
gonna tell
guy?
me. I
Who is
don't
that guy?
know. He was cool looking though. He should have had a little frog lapel pin. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
So there's
I
like
did
some
not
subtle
think of that.
stuff. Yeah, there's like also
Yeah.
like the nephew or I don't know who the little boy was. Was he the nephew or like the cousin of the wife or ex-wife? Or there was like another mini subplot where the man goes to a different part of Japan, and he meets up with his nephew or cousin, the little
Mhm.
boy who has hearing problems, but there's no
Yeah.
problems with his ears. And there's like this metaphor about like a blind willow that
Right.
eats your ears up or
That's
something.
right.
So it's only in your head, but it's not, it's real if you believe it's real. Something like that. They're talking about like it's not
Okay.
really there.
I think that, the problem, I love festivals so much, but sometimes the problem with festivals is that you see so much and you talk to so many people, and sometimes it's hard to, it's not like you go in with a clear, sort of fresh, you've already seen a bunch of other films. I think this one's worth watching again for me, and speaking for myself, like to catch more nuances, because I don't think I think it takes more than one watch. I think it's the nature of the subject matter, just seeing how things tied together and see what I might have missed the first time. Breadcrumbs for the story that I may have missed.
I'm sure there's some stuff I missed too. I'm just like thinking about like maybe like biased speaking here. Like I'm just thinking like I would have liked to see more things, some more than other things, but maybe that's kind of also a thing, also a good reason to watch something again. Like you can appreciate the other things more than the things you actually liked or that you preferred. You know, I felt like it probably was trying to be faithful to the narrative of the original author's work, Murakami's work, and I think that could be a good thing and bad thing. I feel like here it made me feel like a little bit craving more of a certain story versus like the other stories maybe weren't as like enticing to me. But I think from like another perspective, like maybe it's because I'm not in the right point of my life, for example. Like I feel like some people might not want to watch a story about a talking frog and finding crime. They want to watch like the love story between this this now I guess divorced man trying to stitch back his life together because his wife randomly left, and they're talking about like, oh, she left a note, and then they're comparing like at the diner scene when he's with his two lady friends, they were saying, oh, this other friend, she saw a UFO and then she left the next day. So they're kind of like making this absurd statement about like anybody can leave for any reason, basically. So it's like you never know, and it's kind of just
it points to the like catastrophic events that that happen in nature, that happen to us, and that happen in our personal lives, and that we do to create ourselves. So
this might be a movie to watch again, just for the sake of like catching all the nuances of stories, because I think there's like stuff connecting to each other. I just wonder, like, I think that's a good point about the tsunami not being a physical as much as like a mental or emotional. So that could be like an interesting perspective to kind of connect the dots with, for example. So, I did like this movie. I just think I liked certain parts of this movie more than other parts. And I wish those certain parts were like its own film, because I felt like there's so much bread and butter there that they could have like not exploited, but like kind of talked about, like, or expanded upon, because it's like an interesting dynamic to have like a lowly, kind of a loser character kind of go from zero to hero against his will. And I was like, that's an interesting story. I want to see that. That's kind of magical.
I like that.
But that's all my thoughts about the blind willow sleeping woman. I think it's definitely like probably, if the director, I'm sorry, was very much a fan of the original Murakami work, so that's one of the reasons he did this film. So I think in that sense he took liberties to make sure it was as best as he could represent it, as faithful as possible to the original work. So I think people who would appreciate like a faithful representation, or close to a faithful representation of a published work, might appreciate the effort, because sometimes with animated features or with any adaptation, as I mentioned before, there could be like a back and forth between, this is nothing like the original, or this is like cutting off the good stuff. And I feel like this is like a mix of like everything, but the original was like a mix of everything too, because it's like an anthology. It's like many stories that are in one narrative, kind of. So and then that was kind of maybe the intention, basically, to have multiple stories that take place in the same time period. Yeah, that's about it from my end.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's see. So
Unicorn Wars was next, right?
Unicorn Wars.
And this was kind of the spoiler alert, like one of the stories, like I mentioned before, about the Annecy short about like revenge being sweet. And I felt like this movie kind of dissatisfied that urge inside of me.
Oh my Lord. Yeah. Oh, I want to say a quick shout out. Her film was not playing, but I ran into Signe Baumane, director of My Love Affair with Marriage. That's been traveling in the world, and it's a freaking masterpiece. Go see it when you can. It's amazing. Everyone should watch it. But Unicorn Wars. So this, back to the FIAF Animation First Festival. I tell you, when this thing, Delphine mentioned it, and I had seen bits and pieces about it, which sometimes, to be honest, I ignore stuff in the animation news because I just want to like watch the film and not get any extra bias. So I wasn't sure what to expect. All I saw were a few like sort of simple shots, and then I sort of ignored people's like posts from, I don't know, reels and things like that. Was not expecting it or really ready. So I was like, it was a wild ride.
They said it's like Bambi mixed with Apocalypse Now, they said.
Hilarious.
And I guess that's a
It
bit in
says-
description. I wonder if Apocalypse Now, because I've actually never seen, maybe that's a bad
really?
thing.
Definitely watch that.
I wonder if it makes you feel like also a sense of like frustration with some characters, because I felt like some intense frustration with characters in this movie.
Well, I have to say, I was the sort of like Care Bears. They just reminded me of Care Bears. Obviously, there's like an initial contrast between like the dialogue and what's happening, and it does have that like Apocalypse Now feel. And then there's that. I mean, I was sold when there was like a barracks scene where like there's a junk shot, like after shower shot,
frontal
which cracked me up. That is the funniest thing. It was the funniest thing. I was sold after that. I was just like, okay, I'm in. Let's watch this film. But that made me laugh really hard. I have to say though, all of the characters, I hated them. I hated all of the characters.
All of them, even the one that okay, I want to talk about that because I had at least like a couple of characters I liked
the unicorns.
Yeah, but the unicorns didn't really have a story to them, did they? Even though they're in the title, they felt like kind of an afterthought of like, these are the enemies. And
okay, I thought the young unicorn. I mean, because the young unicorn, I'm like Anakin. What am I saying? The young
Maria. I think.
Yeah, because I was watching this Disney Plus. No, but the younger unicorn, did nothing wrong. It was just trying to like survive. I thought that was fine. I guess the bear that friended him, that Tubby was his name, right? Like,
I think it was Tubby because he was like the little chubby bear.
Yeah. He was, I was rooting for him.
I was rooting for him too. And I felt like, okay, I guess, spoilers again. I felt like the ending at least ended everything equally. Everything was like equally playing field wise, but then it's like kind of depressing because that's not the kind of ending I wanted. I wanted like some people to get ahead in life and some people to like
that's the thing. It was such chaos. But what was brilliant about it is animation. Everything's freaking on purpose, right? Everything's intentional. Beautiful nature scenes. Peaceful and beautiful. And that was that contrast that like got me, like hooked me. Because if those had been removed, it would have just been this like chaotic, it would have been like amok, but without a little ending tied up in a bow. You know what I mean? It would have just been like, what did I just watch this chaos for? That was beautifully done and well animated. It was beautifully animated.
It was.
But just, from a, like stepping back perspective, being all like the judgy viewer. My first take was just like, I don't care. Like, just die already, all of you. They weren't very likable, any of the characters, but it was all like on purpose. It felt to me like it was part of the whole message, and then out of that chaos comes mankind, right? Spoilers.
I think most of them, I think you're right. Like, I think most of them are intentionally like just so not. Some of them are hateable, some of them are just likable. But I thought the nice brother of the two twins was nice. Like I was rooting for him throughout. And
he was nice, but he was like useless. You know what I mean? And that's like kind of another character to hate. Well, according to me.
He fought back a little bit. Like, I think he's stuck in this weird like place. There's like this whole backstory between the main characters because they're twins, but fraternal twins.
True.
And there's like this kind of one likes the father more, one likes the mother more, and so the mother got out of the picture, something like that.
They both. Yeah, well, everybody knows there's spoilers, right? So it's not that he didn't like the mother more, it's he was taken from the mother by his perspective of the loser father who he never respected, and he was a sociopath, killed his mother. And
it was kind of like just like this, he's kind of this character who like doesn't want to be second best. He'll kill someone to be the number one because at least he's the one who's alive.
But that's the thing. To go back to the Star Wars thing again for some reason. it's almost like it was like watching a movie about Darth Vader without,
like there was no Padme, there was no like supporting cast.
yeah, exactly. There was no like Luke Skywalker. There was no, Tubby was the closest that you got. And he never really had a chance to be a hero. Not really. I mean, I guess he had his moments where he like tried, but yeah, I don't know. I really liked it though. I liked the end horrible struggle of it all. It was just very effective. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, things don't have to be tied up in a bow. And for all of this, I mean, really, it was like these choices of that contrast with the beautiful environment, and then this strange sort of mythological sort of ending and beginning that happened at the very, very end, made me just dig it. Like, it's almost, I didn't make a decision about whether or not I liked the film until the very end when it was done. Does that make sense?
That's fair. Like, I mean, I felt like throughout the movie, I was just kind of fighting with my, not morals, but like fighting with like internal, I want to support this movie. I want to be supported, but this movie cast is kind of making me like angry, except for like Tubby and like
exactly.
the unicorn. But one of the issues, or I guess for me anyway, I feel like this movie is called Unicorn Wars, but it's kind of one-sided in terms of like narrative. I kind of get why the Care Bear lookalikes, basically, they don't like the unicorns, but I don't fully. I'm sure it's explained more in depth. I think one of the plot points was that the unicorns are environmentalists. They own the forest, but I don't get necessarily. It seems very one-sided, basically. I feel like the bears are more violent out willingly, and the unicorns are just protecting what they have, and it's kind of like this whole fruitless. I guess the fruits of war is just death, but basically, I don't know many of the unicorns by name. The only one that's giving a name is like Maria, which I think is supposed to be like a reference to something, like made like a holy name kind of thing. But I like, because like, you know, the Virgin Mary, she was like this holy figure. I just felt like the unicorns were not really a character. Even the one little unicorn, she wasn't really a character. She was just kind of a plot device. At least the bears, as much as I hate them, most of them, they had unique characters. I hate most of them, but they were identifiably unique. So I felt like that's like a detriment of the film, or maybe that's intentional, but I don't know many of these unicorns or this personality. They're just a colloquial. They're all the same, basically.
Well, maybe they are part of nature, and that character, they're like sort of like Mother Earth fighting against, and that huge monster creature they turn into is just the earth. It's like the earth revolting, and maybe it's the movie is really about self-destruction. Maybe it's about the path that the bears are on to self-destruction, and then at the very, very end, it's like all of those elements are part of humankind.
Yeah, like that, you notice that too, right? Like at the end, that human, like if you ever saw like Fantasia, for example, he kind of looks like that devil figure from Fantasia, like Chernobyl, not Chernobyl. Oh my God, what am I talking? Well, that
Night on Bald Mountain. Yeah,
there we go. Yes, there we go. I don't know what the character's name is, but he has a character name. He looks like that figure consuming the psychopath brother, the nice brother, and a unicorn. And it's kind of like, are these equal parts of a humankind, like psychopathic, nice, and nature, or what's like the metaphor going on? Because I don't know what the conclusion is. I
part simian, right? Since the simians were worshiping and somehow participating in the broth or whatever that was that created the monster.
Yeah, like I wish that kind of, that's another aspect, I guess, like, or again, maybe it's intentionally left out, but kind of explaining what is going on with everything with that dark creature. Like in the beginning of the movie, it's like established that it presents illusions, and that's where we see the unicorn. She thinks her mom is there, and then later on that comes back kind of because one of the brothers comes into his family house because it's an illusion presented by that, I guess, creepy forest house. So is that supposed to be like presenting like entrapment or false beliefs? Like, what is that kind of presenting to the story-wise? Like, story-wise, what is that about necessarily? It's about like trying to trick you into entering the dark side, or what's kind of going on, you know? Because I would have liked more of that, because were they the true villains and the unicorns were just the ones kind of being blamed? You know what I mean? Or were the unicorns agents of the darkness? Because it seems like there were kind of three entities, right? Bears, unicorns, and then the simians. were the bears fighting the wrong villains the whole time? Because the unicorns were literally were not antagonistic; they were just defensive. I think
the whole narrative that they used for their war against the unicorns was kind of false, and like a good unicorn, dead unicorn. You know, like that was just something that was ingrained in them, not based in any kind of truth. And in the end, it was like it was self-defeating and self-destructive. But that's all they knew, and that's, you know, they were doing the best they can within those marks, within those boundaries, living their lives, making their decisions. I don't know. Yeah, there was a lot in that movie.
Maybe just sometimes came to mind. Maybe it was about feeling second best to something they felt they owned, kind of like how the twin brothers.
That's a much better way of saying. Yes.
It was kind of like the direct, obvious allegory where the one twin brother felt he was second best to the other one because the mom liked the nice one more. And I kind of understand. I don't agree with the actions at all, but I understand the feelings. Like he felt like his brother was preferred by the mom, and the mom was kind of openly saying, "Oh, your brother's crazy," and out in the open, which is kind of like a weird thing for a mom to say. I understand why she did it, but it's kind of like you shouldn't say that in front of your kids, even if it's true. So I can kind of get where that mentality gets fostered a little bit, but then it's like competition basically, where like one feels superior and one feels inferior, but the father kind of feels he's feeling the opposite. Like he feels, I think he preferred one child, because remember there's like a scene where he takes one child fishing. He's like, son, I need to tell you something private, you're grown up now. But he didn't trust the other brother, the other son. So it's kind of like, is the paternal more violent and the maternal more kind?
That's interesting.
Kind of something like that. I don't know. The fight was because one brother felt second best to the other brother because one parent didn't like him as much as the other parent. He always felt second best, and he didn't like being second best. So I wonder if the war was kind of like an allegory of like, we don't want to be second best, we want to be number one best.
Oh, sure. And I think that the sort of bad brother was a great villain. I mean, that whole backstory was awesome. It's just that there was no one
to counteract.
There was not.
There was kind of almost, but then that's why I said the ending is kind of at least equalizing.
Yeah,
it's not like the villain wins, but then like no one wins basically. So
I mean, they set up along the way though, they set up these almost like red herrings. Like you're gonna root for the priest, and then you're like, nope. And then you're gonna root for the chief or captain or like the guy in charge of the troops. Nope. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like they're set up to be this like the hero character, and they all kind of fail one after the other to be that hero, you know. And in the end, even the last guy kind of fails too. Yeah, I really liked it. That's the bottom line. I think we both. Or how do you feel about this film? Did you?
I just felt like, again, frustrated with so many characters, and I wanted the characters I was hoping that would be like the top notch, like they would survive, like last girl wins kind of mentality. They didn't make it, but at least again, it's equalizing. I think I would have been more pissed, like frustrated or ticked off if it was like, yeah, the bad guys, the bad characters, like the substantially evil or nasty characters are like the ones who survive. It's kind of more true to life, where like
totally
violence begets more violence. Cruelty causes more cruelty, etc., etc. So I think it's inevitably gonna come back on your face, where like the more negative you are to the world, the more it's gonna hurt you, and eventually it's gonna just assimilate and combine and make everything blow up basically.
Right. And don't do drugs. No.
don't do forest drugs, apparently.
That's right, forest drugs. Yeah, without having a plan. In a time of war.
Yeah, like I think it was okay. I just find it very fascinating, and I guess this goes back to like the idea like animation is not just for kids. Kids is distributing this movie for March. So that's interesting. And on the website they were saying it's like, again, Bambi meets Apocalypse Now. And they're saying it's like just an interesting telltale story about like violence and sworn enemies and prophecies in a new era. So it's like kind of being hyped up as like a
so funny
wartime movie essentially. And it is a wartime movie. I don't know. Like I felt like the two characters I would have rooted for don't really, one has no substance really, and the other one basically demises at the end. So it's like at least I can say that much. Like at least it made it to the end, everybody, and then again equalizing. So it's like I don't know, like basically it's very pretty. The colors are very fantastically colored. I would out of context it would be like a Hallmark card or something, but in
Right.
context it's like not at all for kids. So do not show this to your
Do
child,
not.
please.
That's right.
And
Definitely not.
I guess the only other unicorn movie I could think of, also the unicorn in the title, was Last Unicorn. And I kind of like the different style of unicorns. In that movie, all the unicorns are like angelic and white. In this movie, they're more like dark and shadowy. But they're both presented as like the good, or like at least nice characters or neutral characters. So I don't know, like it's like a different unicorn story basically. I think it's like meant for people who can tolerate more, who aren't gonna root for a character and get disappointed when the character is like not gonna make it or something, and they can appreciate other aspects of a movie. I like stories that are character driven, but I feel like a lot of characters that drive this movie are going places I don't want to see. Basically.
That's right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
So, but it's nice visuals. I like the colors. I think in the end, it's like a nice metaphor, or like allegory for like something substantially bigger. Like, are we all equally good and bad? Or are we all violent versus natural? Like, it's like a nice substantial. Are we all trying to be second best or first best? It's like a nice allegory. I guess it took a lot of bloodshed to get there, but yeah.
Well said. You're absolutely right. So Sunday, what were you able to catch on Sunday? I'm hoping we can spend a little bit more time with Dordogne.
Yeah, I saw that. I wasn't able to see the shorts Shroom's Odyssey and Funny Birds, but I did see Shroom's Odyssey in a previous French festival. I think it was either last year or the year before. They had it on a virtual platform where you could see all the cartoons and animated shorts and animated features on the Eventive platform, I believe, for like a week. So I saw that. I remember liking it. The animation style was like a 20-minute or half-hour TV show, I believe. So it was like I liked it. But I decided to kind of opt for other things to see because I want to see new things or see as many new things as I could see. So I guess briefly looking into it, I did see the work in progress, Dordogne, a conversation with Cedric Babuch and then Aimé Castang, and it was moderated by Francesco Antolini. Basically, they made a video game. Basically, it's like a story about a girl who goes back in time to her childhood grandparents' home. It's kind of like a click. Again, going back to the Telltale analogy, it's kind of like a Telltale game if they did watercolors instead of rotoscoping. It's really presented as like a choose your own adventure kind of story, but there is a narrative that the audience or the video game player in this case would be directed to follow. We saw like a few minutes of a behind the scenes video game demo where the girl is going up and down the stairs. She's trying to light a candle. They're showing how the candle gets lit by putting the lighter on it. It's kind of like interactive in a sense that there's like a lot of steps to it, but it is kind of fluid enough to not be too stiff or too cumbersome, I guess. And yeah, the creators of the game, he mentioned doing actual watercolors for the game, and he presented like a watercolor palette with his own colors and brushes, and he gave it around to the audience. I took a picture of the palette.
Oh, cool.
In the panel. It's a little far apart because I was in like a second or third row, but yeah, and the character in this game, her name is Mimi. So it's like 2 time periods, I believe this game takes place in. One when she's 32 years old, and then one when she's 10 years old. So the game is kind of like a nostalgia trip where she literally goes back to her childhood home to investigate like a mystery. And it's kind of like presented as like a wholesome mystery. It's not really like a murder mystery as far as I understand, but it's kind of meant to be like a narrative about uncovering family secrets and learning more about her roots and learning about her connection to her past, basically. So I think in that sense, in a similar sense to like the first night film with Little Nicholas or Petit Nicolas, they're using the watercolor aesthetics here to kind of represent like a more timeless nature or a more like storybook quality, where there is no there is a time period in this case, but it's more it doesn't have to be specifically tied to a specific era. It can take place more whenever it wants to, but the story itself is kind of personal to this character, and it's kind of going from her perspective and her experiences as a child in her grandparents' home. And again, it's a shame that we weren't able to play, or it was not available at the festival. There were other games at the festival too, including one as I heard many times, because I was trying to play it, but it was kind of like a queue to get in. There was like a game in the library where you play as a panda that broke up with his girlfriend. So
yeah, that's a great place. It's called Glimpse, and it was
yes.
was produced by Atlas 5. I saw that at Tribeca. Actually, I wrote a little a blurb about it. That piece in particular had some of the best animation. It was one of my favorite pieces of the VR pieces because of the animation, because there was really just a lot of love and time and care put into it. Like the fingers are, there's like finger animation and stuff like that sort of added that really makes you care about the characters. That's what I've been saying from the beginning. Like VR needs that kind of love, and not all pieces have that. And that one is a kind of shining example of really using effective animation to tell a story. That's what I have to say about that one. I really love that
I wanted to play that for sure, but again, there was a queue and I didn't want to like butt in, like take someone else's seat when they're like in the middle. So I kind of like would go back every few kind of hours and
we should find a time, because I have I'll just bring my headset or something. You know what I mean? Like, because
we can try that. Yeah. Like I'm not gonna force you, because I know it's like gonna be a little, a lot of stuff going on, but I would love to play it, or at least try to play it whenever.
It's really lovely. It really is.
Like
that
might be like a nice showcase too for ANNY event, if there's ever like a thing that we have like opportunity to do a venue or something. But that's on the side.
When we get into our in-person stuff. It looks like this Dordogne, it looks almost like the play style almost looks like Escape from Monkey Island. You remember those Monkey Island games? It's just the point and click adventure where it's like you move up to an object and then you click a button to interact with it, and then there's like an inventory and then additional inventory mini games and things. That's cool.
Yeah, there's definitely like someone said this in the panel. How do you do like a Life is Strange kind of game? She asked the panel.
I like
and
that.
was kind of like, I think that's the intention, like to do like a choose your own adventure or choose an option story. And they kind of said what I mentioned earlier. There is like a narrative. It's not really multifaceted or like multiple endings, but there is kind of like you have free reign to go different places to see the environment. You could go to the garden, you could go to the river, you can go down the hill.
Gotcha.
There's like different options. You're not forced into like A, B, C. You're not forced into doing the alphabet like that.
Right, but there's still like a narrative tree that you can sort of see happening.
Yeah, it's kind of like a take your own place and go from there kind of thing. And I appreciate that, because I feel Telltale Games are great from my experience, or from like my limited experience, but one of the downfalls can be like the sense of maybe being too forced to pick a decision right away, or like not having enough free reign.
that timer for their choices. I think it works sometimes, like in some of the zombie games, it really helps, I think, the storyline, but I could see how in certain other games it might not be as effective. I really like those don't nod games as well. To me, like, they're not really games, they're like interactive stories basically, right? It's just like an interactive way to tell a story. You can't like eat pizza, or whatever, you can't just passively sit back unless you're with someone else who's playing it. I really like those. I enjoy those a lot, like as a chill sort of story experience. That's cool.
I liked it. I really think I'm looking forward to when it comes out. I'm just like browsing quickly. It might be coming on Steam eventually. There's like a Steam page.
There's a wish list. I checked that. What else did you see on Sunday? The Francophone shorts?
I saw the second program of Francophone shorts. That they marketed it from day one as like program 1 was more family friendly and program 2 was more for adults, because they said mature audiences only. And I think right from the start, it's kind of like indicative of what you're gonna see. Cool. I remember one of the shorts from that section was this piece about a woman experiencing like sexuality, and she's religious, so she's raised to like not think about sexual thoughts, think about Jesus, and then she's like, but I find Jesus attractive. So it's like kind of like a personal come to terms with her sexuality, and she feels like less guilty nowadays. But growing up, she was told to be guilty or feel ashamed about her sexuality. So it's like an interesting, slight, short biographical piece about that. That was called Magical Caresses, Sweet Jesus, by director Laurie Malaparte Traversy from Canada. And yeah, it's like it is adult from the get-go, so it's like true to the word. The next one, or one of the next ones I saw was El After del Mundo, or After the World, by director Florentina Gonzalez. It's kind of like this post-apocalypse world where everything is flooded, everything's dismantled. This bicycle rider, she's trying to find Wi-Fi to download music, but everything is dismantled. She comes across like this marine world, and there's like a ex-employee there, and they just talk, and then they go on a next adventure. So it's like a nice but kind of bittersweet story, because it seems like everything is decimated, everything is destroyed. There's no like or very little humanity there, or like no human life. And there's like the ex-employee, the ex-marine world employee, she's like living in the carcass or the dead bones of a whale or something. Ooh. So she's kind of like holding on to the past, but the whale is like literally just dead. Everything's like just bones around her. So it's kind of like a colorful, if you ever saw like Bojack Horseman, it's kind of similar to that art style, but it is kind of more colorful, or like more neon-y, but it is kind of still like a depressing, slightly bittersweet story. So I liked it though. Oh, this is like a stop motion film, and it goes back to like, I wish there was more comeuppance for revenge. It's called Skinned, or by director Joaquin Heresy, I believe. It's like a short film about like these two, I guess, twins who are conjoined. They have the same leg basically, and one of them is more of a glutton, the other one hates being with the sister. And so, spoiler, there's like murder, but then does she really kill her, or is she just afraid she did? It's kind of like a twist at the end where she wants to go back to normal, but it's kind of like a morbid normalcy basically. Like there's like some bunnies being slaughtered in this film, like cutting of legs. It's kind of a gross stop motion film, but like in like a good, like scary, spooky Halloween sense, you know? So I like that. The benefactors, very quickly, I'm just going like as I see them, but the benefactors, from what I remember, was like this short film about this guy who works on the boardwalk, and these rich kind of people who are like so spoiled, they need someone else to do their stuff. Like they pay him to carry them around, to carry a bicycle for them, to lift them in the ocean so they can wrestle with each other. And then he has like a tragic demise at the end, and then the rich people just don't learn their lesson, they do it to another person basically. So it's basically like a story about like how rich people don't care who they hurt basically. So I was kind of like I don't want to say true to life, but like very poignant, very heart punching, I guess, you know.
I recognize that film actually.
Yeah, and then there was Freedom Swimmer by director Olivia Martine McGuire. This was interesting. So it's kind of like a biographical story about a girl's grandfather who swims from China to Hong Kong during the Cultural Revolution, when there was like a lot of political upheaval. And the ending is kind of like this tongue-in-cheek or meta reference, how she's telling her grandfather, I'm going to make an animated film about this. I'm going to hire actors. We're not going to show the actors' faces. And that's exactly what they do in the whole movie. So it's a mix of live action, but you don't see the actors' faces. You only see their hands or their throats or like their body, but you don't see their faces. And then it's like a sketchy kind of animation style where she's telling the grandfather's story about how he and the girl's mom escaped Hong Kong, and they had to go to at night. They stole like a hospital incontinence bag or incontinence sheet, where if people, it's like a basically a pee pad for like people in a hospital. How they made it float in the river. So they used two of those, they stitched it together, and then they put like gasoline or something to make it float, and they used that to float from China to Hong Kong. And it took them like 8 hours or something in the cold dead of night. It was intense. It's biographical, so it was like a true story, but it was like an intense, like, wow, that's crazy. And you know, it's kind of like trying to be more representative, like some people would do anything to escape because they're desperate, and that's kind of like the story in a nutshell. And then I think one more was called Scale. It's about this like drug. Well, he's not a drug addict as much as like a medical user. Like he has like a lot of like health opioid addiction, I believe. So he's like a writer and he's trying to write a story about like traffic lights, and he's lost his sense of perspective, but he hasn't lost his sense of scale. So there's like this idea of his drugs addiction makes him lose like reality, because he kind of goes into like overdrive in driving sense, but more in like the reality sense too. Like he doesn't know how to behave in front of his family. He kind of yells. He kind of becomes abusive. It's like just like a sense of like a drug addict trying to like cope with his life, and there's no conclusive ending. It's more just like, yeah, my perspective is bad, but I never lost my sense of scale. So he understands scale even as a drug addict. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Did you see Gandhar?
I did, yes.
I did not see that one.
That was interesting, right? So they mentioned in the beginning, it was released in the 1980s under a different studio, under Harvey Weinstein's studio, I think they mentioned. And it was censored a lot. They removed like a lot of like the nudity, or as much as they could, like the sexual implications, things like that. And then they tried to make it more family friendly, but I guess it didn't do that well in the dub version. So this is like the first uncensored original version with English subs. And I guess like as a testament to like sci-fi films from the 80s, it is representative of like an 80s sci-fi film. But I also felt like, to be honest, it was a bit slow and like treading in some places, or a lot of places. It's not like it's like kind of the opposite problem of like the Unicorn Wars. Like, where in that movie I hated most of the characters, but at least they have personalities. In this movie, I feel like I don't hate any of the characters, but I feel like no one has a personality in this movie. And there's like this like hero character. He's kind of like He-Man, and well, he's like an alternative He-Man in space, you know? And he's trying to like find the cure to this like robot army that's trying to kill everybody. And there is like an interesting twist with that. I don't really feel like most of the characters have any sense of like individuality. Like I don't care about most of the characters. And there's like this idea of like, this is like a utopia, right? Like this is like a woman run utopia. There's no bad things, there's no war, so they don't know how to fight against a robot army. It's kind of like a twist in later on where like they realized they had a part in this robot army indirectly, because they were trying to make perfection, but then perfection bled into evilness, and then that evilness is trying to make basically AI trying to take over the world, basically. And that's interesting. I felt like just so slow paced. It was like so many things I didn't really there's some snippets of like, oh yeah, I like that part, like when they go talk to like this big literal brain in the middle of the ocean. That's like interesting. Or there's like the sense of robot army, they're kind of like these creepy soulless figures, and when you blow them up, there's nothing inside them, so it's like emptiness basically. But I don't know, I just felt like this movie was a bit slow and very underwhelming. And I guess I don't know if that's indicative of like just the nature of sci-fi films in the 80s being like this. I don't want to think that, because I've not seen every single 80s sci-fi film. This film was kind of just a little bit, it had like a good narrative, or I guess good like pieces of a plot, like the idea of like perfection can be taken away from you and become its own entity and becomes an enemy to you, or this idea of just like trying to stop your past from controlling your future. It was like it kind of like a past and future element here too. But I don't know, I just felt a little bored by this movie. Gotcha. And it's a shame, because I think the animation's decently pretty. It's not like it's ugly animation. I think it's very well made and well constructed, but the story was kind of hard to keep together, like except for like certain parts with like the metal men, the metal army, with like these dystopian figures attacking the utopia. But even in the ending, it kind of comes back to perfection too quickly, almost like it's too convenient how it ends, you know? What about the last feature, No Dogs or Italians Allowed, which was last year's work in progress by director Alain Ughetto. And I know I saw the work in progress last year in the FIAF Sky Room. The director brought
puppets from the stop motion film, and that was, I mean, that's always a cool thing. And he let everyone sort of gently pass the little bodies around the room. It was just a cool thing to sort of see the work in progress for. How did you feel about that film?
I felt like it was intentionally like a work in progress itself, the film, but in like the best way.
Yeah.
What I mean by this is like this story is presented as like, I guess the director himself, Alain, he is making a stop motion movie, and he's making the boards, he's making the puppets,
Right.
he's making the little tools, and every so often in the movie, he interacts with the puppets. So the puppets are like his characters,
right.
but then he's a character too.
Yeah, his hand sort of shows it's like he has a specific real like a place in the film.
He's the narrator, but then he's also like a character alongside them, kind of, because he's the one directing them. It's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek comedy, or like a historical comedy in a way, because there is like some element of like laughter, and then there's like, oh wait, someone got hurt because of that. So there's like a few scenes where like people unfortunately die, but then the scene itself was presented in like a very cartoony way. And there's like other ways to describe it too, but it's like very over the top almost, like or very like sudden. So it's kind of like, oh, that happened, and then you realize, oh wait, someone is no longer here. So I think that was kind of the intention, or like a deliberate choice, where he's trying to make this story where it's like, because I guess in the real life too, it's like sometimes when the bad things happen, it's like so sudden, like comes out of nowhere, and it's like a shock to the system. And then, you know, like as we mentioned before, like sometimes laughter is like the best way to deal with awkwardness. So like in those funny scenes, it wasn't like funny because someone got hurt. It was more like so sudden and like random. It was like, I didn't expect that kind of laughter. So I definitely like it. There was like this, I like the dualness of like some parts, like the actual director's parts are in French, but then the Italian characters speak Italian. The whole film I saw the version in English subtitle version, with subtitles on the bottom, but the film's like both in French and Italian. So he's narrating the story because he's from France, because he's talking about his Italian ancestors, but the Italian ancestors speak Italian because that's their heritage. So I kind of like that duality. Like some films would not go both ways. They would not include both languages because it would be like an extra layer to kind of incorporate. But I appreciate that in authenticity, because he's being truthful to what the situation is. Like he has French and Italian because that's his heritage, you know? So I feel like that's really nice to have. And at the end of the day, when the subtitle's there, it's all like you're still reading subtitles regardless of what language is there. So to me, it makes me feel more immersed in the story, because it feels more authentic to what is being presented, basically. Where he for example, there's like stories about him being his grandpa and his grandma and the family going to France, and there's like a sign, which is the title of the movie, called "No Dogs or Italians Allowed" in French, of course. And one of the kids asked the father, why is that sign there? And the father's trying to explain, oh, because they're afraid the dogs are gonna bite the Italians. That's why. We're Italians are very scared of dogs. And he's trying to like brush it off as not being like a prejudice thing. He's trying to brush it off like being like they're trying to protect us thing. So, but you know, the language duality basically is incorporated into the movie as part of the structure of his ancestors' upbringing, because his ancestors were in Italian, but they were also in France for a large part of life. So it's both.
Layering on personal archaeology, which is kind of what this is, you know, and then building from there. I mean, you know, instead of adapting someone else's piece or even, you know, writing a screenplay first, I think it's a really, you know, sort of interesting origin. And I think that, you know, inevitably that end result, if it's done well, it becomes something that, you know, everyone can relate to. Maybe it's because I used to paint from family photographs, you know what I mean? Like part of it, maybe that's the sort of draw, you know what I mean? But actually, I really like that sort of origin of this film.
Yeah, this movie even includes some actual photographs of, I'm assuming, his actual family in black and white. And there's like some back and forth between the clay little figurine, the clay stop motion figure, talking to the narrator, the human, and she's like pointing at the picture like, oh, that's your grandpa, he's the one with the mustache.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, that's
There's like a lot
awesome.
of like meta commentary, like how it's fictionalized the story, or the story is using fictional representations of the real people, but
Mhm.
the fictional caricatures are based on the real people. Basically, it's like representing both. Like it's both a fictional representation, but also the actual
Right.
person.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's creating this other thing, it's art. Did
Yeah.
you I did not go to the students competition award ceremony. Did you attend that, or was that
Um,
afterwards? I did not go to that.
if I'm not mistaken, that was in the morning. I'm not in the morning. In pre the final movie, the no
I
talk
see.
or
Okay.
talent allowed. They
Oh, it was
showcased.
just in the block. I was just looking at the schedule. Okay, okay.
Yeah, they were doing like the announcements, and I think for both the French and the American schools, there was two winners each. I have to look
Gotcha.
into the agenda of who won exactly, but
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, and
I think they were trying to showcase the winners at the festival because of technical difficulties with the film.
gotcha.
They had
Yeah,
to like cut it off a little bit, unfortunately. So
gotcha. Okay.
it worked out in the end with the film. At least won the best French and best animated student
Gotcha.
awards. So
We'll see.
yeah, but it was
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
It was just a quick, I guess, snippet about the French and American awards for students. I read, as I understand, there's two awards, one for French students and one for the American students. And the American films were judged by a French panel, and then the French films were judged by an American panel. So it was kind of like a
Oh,
cross-cultural intermixing, where it was not going to be biased. Where like obviously Americans would be picking the best American. It was kind of intentionally mix and matching to kind of encourage watching different films from different
cool.
cultures.
That's
So
cool. Yeah. See, this festival just gets better and better every year. It really does. Like they really take such time and care. I said that already, but
yeah, can I
it's a great
did you
addition.
see the island, by the way? I wasn't able to see that picture.
I did not,
Oh.
unfortunately. I know it's on my list to see in the future. And Anka Damian was the guest of honor this year, so
Mhm.
that's on my list. But I
That's
unfortunately,
she also did, if I remember correctly, like a couple years ago, she had a premiere. She had a showcase of Morona's Tale,
right.
the movie about the dog that is like a runaway in France, and she goes into different adventures. She lives with a circus, and then she lives with like an old curmudgeonly person. It was like kind of a sad story because the dog has a tragic story in that movie, but she's the same director. She's the same creator of that film too.
Morona's Fantastic Tale.
There we go. Yeah. That's the movie where the dog is Morona, but she's black and white, the dog. And she actually, I distinctly remember, she had a Q&A for that movie, and someone asked, how come Morona is black and white when Morona means brown? And she's like, oh, it's an artistic interpretation. It's like a creative expression. It's not seriously taken seriously. She doesn't think it's basically like artistic license, basically. And that was like a funny question
Ah,
because a kid asked that question.
that's cool. That's cool for that kid. That's awesome. A little
Mhm.
critic in making. That's funny. Yeah, that was 2020.
That was right before COVID locked down everything. So I remember going to see that, and it was like a kind of an emotional whirlwind from the start of that movie. So she did that. So I'm not sure how the island is, if it's like also
Yeah.
equally emotionally volatile, or if it's like more chill and relaxed. I need to see it too. I need to see it too eventually.
Yeah, that's on our both of our lists. We'll attack that later. A future date, a future date.
I just want to bring it up because that was one of the sidelines or side uh festivities, I guess, for the festival. They had students do a 48-hour challenge to
Right.
animate a segment of this film, and they had to do like a specific sequence, I believe. Um, it was two schools. It was one in France and one in Baltimore, I believe. I will look it up the names more officially. But basically both of these students schools had to do like a few seconds each of like a snippet from Anka from the island. And they presented it in front of the No Dogs or Italians Allowed movie,
Mm-hmm.
the a whole minute that they animated in 48 hours basically. So it's like a
Wow.
challenge basically to animate something in 48 hours, and they did a really good job. There's like
Wow.
some really great pieces they did in CGI or hand drawn. Like it was mixed media. It was not like
Wow.
one size only. So
Right. That's super cool.
That
That's
was really invigorating to see. Well, not to promote or not to encourage like crunch period. I don't think that's healthy or like that's
right.
applicable. But the fact that in general people can create animation like 48 hours like that, it's like really impressive and really like invigorating. Like it's really cool that
showing
they did
off
that.
Their skills. Yeah, that's cool.
They had like all-nighters. I'm sure they had like a early morning rise. Like they did a lot of work in like that 2-day period. So and they had like a station at the festival actually where it was a computer and you could sit down and watch the French students and the Baltimore students doing their Adobe After Effects or photoshopping. It's like
I suppose it's effective like in sort of showing the students what they can do themselves, like just showing them what they can accomplish. But yeah, you're right, there is this sort of like double-edged, sort of a negative sort of double-edged sword to the whole thing if it encourages crunch time, because people are like, oh, look what you can do in 48 hours.
I mean,
I never really thought about that, but yeah,
I mean,
you're right.
I don't think it was intentionally. I don't believe it's like intentionally like to
of course not.
You know,
but and FIAF and Animation First is all about celebrating the filmmaker and respecting the filmmaker. Don't get us wrong, but that is really an interesting thought that I hadn't, to be honest, I had not considered that before. So that's it's important to think about these things, you know, especially if you're like trying to create events and help filmmakers out. It's good to think about. That's cool.
Animation takes time and labor, and then as much time as you need, it doesn't always have to be a rushed project, you know.
That's right. There's a labor triangle involved. You know, cheap and fast or well done. And pick two.
That's about it from
I
my
think
end.
that's us for the FIAF French Institute Alliance Française Animation First 2023 Festival. 6th edition, not 8th, 6th. I always got Annie on the brain. Kelly, do you want to give everyone an idea of how they could reach you, or do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Nothing crazy. Like I have a LinkedIn if you want to find me. My name is Kelly and Barahona there. I just have like a brief bio. I volunteer work for Animation Nights and I do nonprofit work right now. So I'm like doing a few things right now. So that's basically my plug, but you know, nothing too crazy right there. But nothing else from my end. And
this is Yvonne Grinkovich. You can reach me on Twitter at @isnare_inc. And you could find me via the Animation Nights New York website. So that's us. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you soon.
Take care, everybody.